afternoon, everyone. My name is Aline McNall, and I'll be doing this afternoon's Washington update for the IEEE-USA office. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and I look forward to answering them either during the presentation or just right afterwards. To start off, I wanted to talk about the NIST President's Budget Request, or I should say the President's Budget Request for NIST. Because in the last legislative update, we chatted about the Department of Commerce, so I wanted to dive a little deeper into the NIST budget. So the Scientific and Technical Research Services account is one we care very much about, and that's at $995 million. So that's a $68.7 million increase. So we were incredibly pleased with that. IEEE is also a big advocate for Industrial Technical Services account, as well as the Manufacturing USA and the Manufacturing Extension Partnerships Program. We definitely advocate as well for the Construction of Research Facilities account, which was at $262.1 million. So this increase includes a couple of different recommendations from NIST in terms of their maintenance backlog, and NIST is hoping to really address that. There was a recent National Academies study on that, and I'll be discussing that in a little bit. The NIST total budget at this point with the President's budget request is $1.632 billion, and IEEE looks forward to working with Congress to ensure as strong as possible funding for the entire NIST budget. So NIST modernization needs were kind of outlined in the recent National Academies study. So in terms of that study, they looked at what are the needs of the agency, but also the future needs versus the maintenance backlog. So modernizing lab facilities to meet the measurement, science, and mission-focused research and development challenges of today, but also looking at what are the future needs of the agency. So the report also recommends that NIST address underlying deficiencies within the campus infrastructure, which includes central utility plants, distribution systems, and electric power. There was a $400 million annual recommendation for the next 12 years. So given our tight budget environment, I'm not quite sure that Congress will necessarily take that entire recommendation, but I do know that House Science in particular is very concerned with NIST infrastructure issues and looks forward to trying to find a way that this maintenance backlog can be addressed in the budget cycle. There was also a NIST draft coordinator recovery plan that was discussed in the National Academies report. And for the full report, please visit the National Academies website. So a quick discussion about NIST as it relates to the CHIPS Act. So as many of you know, IEEE advocated for the passage of the CHIPS Act and certainly many of the programs for NIST that were in that act. Not a lot of those programs have necessarily received appropriations yet because it was more of an authorization bill, which is a key step in the appropriations process. But now IEEE is looking forward to actually working with appropriators on these funds to make sure that they're real dollars. So issues ranging for Manufacturing USA, some of the things in the bill that were authorized were supporting greater geographic diversity and expanding opportunities for minority-serving institutions, as well as promoting domestic production of technologies developed under the Manufacturing USA program. So these are all issues that IEEE certainly discussed with Congress as the CHIPS Act was becoming law, and we look forward to actually appropriating funding for Manufacturing USA in order to achieve these goals. The Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program, the CHIPS Act established the expansion of the award pilot program, especially for workforce development, but also resilient supply chains and tech upgrades for small and medium manufacturers. The CHIPS Act also updates Manufacturing Extension Partnership to increase outreach for underrepresented communities, as well as it establishes a voluntary national supply chain database. A bit about the NSF budget. So the president released in early March. I discussed this a bit last week, but I did want to showcase these numbers to compare with the NIST numbers that we just discussed. A quick overview of kind of some of the defense research issues. So whereas the president's budget certainly touches on many S&T issues, and we were very pleased with a lot of increases in other agencies, there's some concern about the defense research accounts. And so the broader STEM policy community is looking to advocate for defense research funding, and IEEE is certainly involved in those negotiations with Congress. So we're urging Congress to reject the proposed cuts to 6.1, which is the most basic research, 6.2 and 6.3 research accounts, to provide at least 6% increase over FY23 for especially the 6.1 program element in FY24. The basic research accounts were very much cut in the president's budget, and we hope that Congress will restore that funding as they have done in the past. The president's budget also cuts basic research initiatives by $21.8 million, and we hope that an increase of $5.6 million would adequately address some of the issues in that initiative. The president's budget does eliminate the Space Force University Research Initiatives funding, and IEEE would strongly recommend that Congress restore that funding as well. The university research initiatives, which include the Murray and the Durrip programs, so that would be the Multidisciplinary University Research Initiative, as well as the Defense University Research Initiative programs, those are all discussed in the president's budget. And some of these programs were certainly cut, and IEEE looks forward to working with Congress to ensure that that is not the case in the final appropriations process. DARPA should, of course, continue spearheading R&D in hypersonics and biological technologies, as well as semiconductors and other key technology areas. And we look forward to working with both DoD as well as Congress to ensure that that continues. Budget negotiations regarding the CHIPS Act. So the CHIPS Act obviously was a really great bill in terms of appropriating funding for the semiconductor community and also authorizing funding for the Office of Science, for NIST, and for NSF. However, we are looking at the real funding issues of actually appropriating that funding, actually making sure that that becomes part of the budget process. In discussions with the House majority has proposed actually a rollback of discretionary funding to FY22 levels, which would be except for defense, veterans, and homeland security funds. And so in terms of what that would do to NSF, NIST, NASA, the Department of Commerce, as well as the Department of Energy, IEEE is unsure of because of the fact that the Senate obviously is controlled by Democrats and the House is controlled by Republicans. What we're expecting is that there will be very different proposals set forth by each chamber that will then need to be reconciled. So the reconciliation process will be very complicated this year. The administration certainly requests a smaller boost in discretionary spending this year than in last year. But we did note that there was the $1.2 billion for the new Technology Innovation and Partnerships Directorate at NSF, which IEEE strongly is supportive of, as well as the $300 million increase in regional innovation engines at the NSF. So IEEE is very supportive of this funding and does hope that becomes part of the final appropriations bills for NSF. The president's budget also included $2 billion for R&D relating to key technology areas, as well as $1.6 billion for climate. So IEEE is, again, really supportive of this funding and hopes to maintain that in the final appropriations process. The Office of Science in the president's budget, so that's the largest funder of basic research, would receive $680 million increase, which is an 8% increase. And then we were pleased with the NIST lab programs, which would receive a 4% increase, while manufacturing programs would see a significant increase. IEEE is very, very supportive of the balance between those programs and understands that and tries to help Congress understand the needs of the lab program as well as the needs of the manufacturing programs at NIST to ensure the strongest funding possible. A quick discussion about the National Science and Technology Strategy. So this was an issue that began in the Trump administration under Kelvin Droegemeier. He was one of the leaders in starting these discussions about having a strategy. And now the House Science Committee has chosen to examine this in its actually first hearing of this new Congress. So they examined the role that National Science and Technology Strategy could play in addressing urgent challenges. So many factors were part of this, foreign entities and kind of the international competitiveness threat from various other foreign bodies, or foreign countries, I should say, but also the threat of climate change. So in the hearing, the Democrats did focus more on climate change, while the Republicans and the Democrats did focus on the threats of foreign entities. So looking at kind of how can we define our international competitiveness with respect to key technology areas, but also other kind of issues. So issues in that hearing, and also just the general discussions on the Hill on this idea of a national strategy, include kind of how do we define this global context of science and technology, and how secure really is U.S. leadership. Obviously, there are different technology areas, and certain countries are leading in some, and we are leading in others. And so the congressional kind of discussions are how can we secure U.S. leadership in as many key technology areas as possible. Leadership in key technology areas is, of course, key to economic competitiveness. So many congressional entities, including House Science, but also other committees in Congress, are very focused on the economic competitiveness angle. The bold and transformative vision towards the future. So not just looking at the next 5 or 10 years, but looking at beyond the next 25 years, and how can U.S. maintain leadership beyond that? So very long-term, which is a good thing for Congress to consider. Congressional kind of terms tend to be 2 years, and so in a lot of cases, we've had discussions with members of Congress that are shorter term, but in this particular case about the strategy, they're looking very, very long term, and we're pleased with those, pleased to provide information to Congress to be able to make those decisions. So things like values and norms, as well as rule of governing rules, both domestically and internationally, as it relates to R&D collaborations, are all part of these discussions. And then also just how to capitalize on scientific breakthroughs. Obviously, the U.S. has had many, but so have other countries. And so how can we as a country capitalize on these breakthroughs and then push forward in our S&T enterprise? A quick note for those of you who have signed up for our Congressional Visit Days next week. We thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in person for the first time in a few years. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions about the logistics, either in this forum or just through email, or feel free to give me a call as well. But IEEE will bring about 100 engineers and researchers to Capitol Hill next week to visit with members as well as senators. And topics will include mainly appropriations and budgets for each of the agencies that we do care about, but also just energy and space and other research issues. Those of you who do AI, those of you who do key technology research in your day jobs, we look forward to having you provide that information to your representative and really forming that relationship to be able to drive those policy discussions as Congress moves forward on these really important topics. Please feel free to reach out to any of our government relations staff, myself or Russ or Erica or James or Kayla are certainly happy to answer any of your questions about the congressional visits. So ends my legislative update this afternoon. I'm certainly happy to take any questions, comments, or wise remarks from anyone listening in at the moment, or feel free to reach out by email. Let's see, I do see one comment from Brendan Godfrey. DoD also have infrastructure issues. Yes, thank you for certainly bringing that up. IEEE has noted, and I would say NASA does as well, for example. So IEEE has noted that in terms of NIST's infrastructure issues, that's a huge percentage of the NIST budget. Obviously, DoD and NASA also have infrastructure needs, and that the value of those upgrades is certainly significant. And we would certainly love to discuss the DoD lab infrastructure issues with Congress, should you wish to do that next week. But in terms of the kind of the percentage of the overall budget, the NIST infrastructure needs and the lab maintenance issues at NIST, that's a huge percentage of that budget, whereas it's slightly less percentage. I'm not actually sure the exact numbers, but it's a slightly less percent of the overall agency budget for DoD and NASA. So that's actually why we've been focused on the NIST infrastructure issue, is just the percentage of their budget that it takes up is enormous. Glad you emphasized the importance of a national S&T strategy. Yes, thank you. So in terms of that, IEEE looks forward to commenting on that S&T strategy. We do have good relations with the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House and the other agencies in the federal government who are involved in those negotiations. So I'm sure we will be able to comment as an actual plan moves forward and becomes a national strategy. And certainly happy to hear feedback from anyone in the audience, but also just our policy committees. For those of you who are listening in and interested in policy, we would certainly be happy to have you participate in any policy committees that you might be interested in. These are generally once a month discussions on issues throughout the federal government, but topics include R&D, energy, defense, space, transportation, entrepreneurship, AI, patents, and various other innovative topics. But those tend to be our standing committees, and we do look forward to hearing from any of you who might be interested in joining them. And that's a good way to kind of get updates from the federal government, from the staff of IEEE, to learn about what the federal government is up to. Are there any other questions from today's update? Well, it looks like there are no other questions. I certainly thank all of you for tuning in, and certainly hope to see as many of you as possible next week for our congressional visits. Please feel free to reach out in the meantime. Our next legislative update will be April 13th, 2023, same time and same format in terms of YouTube and other social media. Looking forward to chatting with you all at those times. Thank you so much.